more Trump news, the truth about Kwanzaa and Earth Day, and why I find predictive text to be hilarious. Next on Jinka Jabo. So before we begin, as you can see, I'm still clearly freezing in this 70 degree weather. 70 degrees feels cold to me now. I am very much like a lizard these days. It's changed my blood. I've seen reports of like below 27 below, more than 20 below in Wisconsin right now, northern Wisconsin where I'm from. And I'm talking in Fahrenheit, of course, because I never use Celsius. For as long as I've been exposed to it, I've never used a Celsius except when I've had to explain it to other people. But we're not going to do that right here. But it still feels really cold to me, and it was raining yesterday. But I didn't care, I just had to get out of the house. And, that morning anyway, it didn't matter because I had a bus to school. And when I got out into the provinces to teach high school, it's a funny situation in the morning where a lizard scampered out of a classroom. And you see lizards from time to time, but this one was really frightened. It had nowhere to go. It was just kind of stuck. It was just cornered standing there. And so people were jumping over it, shrieking. And one girl, this 11th grader, went down and pressed on its tail, and it pulled its tail off and handed it to me and waved it in my face. And I was just, I stood back for a minute. But, these were country kids, anyway, so they were playing with the lizard. Like, one of them was trying to pull off its hands, and I just thought that was really morose, and I just didn't want to see it, and so I kind of cringed. And, these are kids out in the country, it's not like teaching the Hanoi youth or kids in any city where I've worked so far. And but someone else came and rescued it, and she took it away, and I thought it was dead, but it started flopping around again, and I felt better. And I say that, wearing a leather coat as I'm saying that. I had meat for lunch, but who knows? It's just seeing it up close that hurts. It reminded me of the ending of Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, where they're playing with the spider in the sink. Anyway, that was my morning. And then last night I tried boxing for the first time. I went to a boxing class. I had never tried that. And, it was really good. And it just reminded me that I really need to start taking better care of myself, because I am a bit overweight these days. And as we all say it every January. But my brothers was saying, my two younger brothers, they said, yeah, we're going to just give up beer completely. And I think, yeah, that's a good idea. You have to start small with things like that. Anyway, talking way too much about personal stuff. When we do have some interesting news, Michael Knowles from the Daily Wire, and I started watching the Daily Wire, of course, because of Ben, but I've been watching more and more of Michael Knowles. He has this very concise and very informative article on their website right now about the origins of Kwanzaa, because we often hear about Kwanzaa, but few of us have really sat down to examine it. But I remember learning about it at some point, learning that it had some sort of history, but having it all spelled out for me was really quite interesting. And this is a holiday that I don't know anyone that celebrates, and it's something that everyone has always kind of made fun of. But, I say that as someone who comes from an area that was mostly white or Asian. We didn't have many African Americans where I grew up, so I'm not sure. Or is it a city thing? It just seems odd to me. It seems like the black families that we did know were Christian, like everybody else. But anyway, it was founded in 1966. I think that's the same year as the founding of the Church of Satan, incidentally. I don't know what that has to do with anything. 66 had some really good music also. But anyway, it was by Ronald Everett, who later changed his name to some African-sounding thing. And I didn't bother writing it down, so I'm not going to even try to pronounce it. But he was a Africana Studies professor in L.A. I think he was UCLA. And he was involved in turf wars, I guess, with the Black Panthers, because he had a gang of his own. And at one point, his gang murdered two members of the Black Panthers over a turf war at UCLA. A few years later, he was sentenced to prison for kidnapping and torturing two women, and the details are very disgusting. He tied them up and stripped them and hit them in the head with a toaster and other weird stuff like that. You can get the full detail in the article below if you're interested. But it was ruled in the end that he was schizophrenic, and that was to give him some clemency. And the people who examined him found that he was indeed he's mentally out there and a dangerous person, and needed to be kept apart from society and treated and dealt with, cared for, I guess. And anyway, reading this article reminded me of Earth Day. Now, Earth Day is something that I do remember celebrating, and I do remember the revival in the 90s. And I remember environmentalism was one of the big hip causes when we were kids, and it was like Captain Planet was on TV. I remember, incidentally, about Captain Planet talking to a friend who grew up in Bangladesh, and she's roughly the same age as I am, maybe a few years younger. And she was saying that was one of her favorite shows growing up in Bangladesh. It was so odd to think that things like that, stray things that you didn't think were even that popular when you were kids, had worldwide traction. But anyway, I remember that, and I remember Fern Gully, Land Before Time. Like, there are all these movies that had lush environmental scenes and environmental messages, I would say. It's said by the EPA, the guys in charge of Earth Day, that it was the Wisconsin Senator Gaylord Nelson who officially made Earth Day. But it was originally celebrated by a few different people who all took varying levels of credit for it. But I've always been interested by the story of Ira Einhorn, who was a celebrity environmentalist, activist, leftist. As in, that was one of the leftist causes that I would say white people really got involved in. Which isn't to say that there weren't white groups that were in support of the Black Panthers and stuff, but it was a much different distinction, you know. But the environmental causes, that was something that everyone could get behind. And it's something that just seemed intuitively correct, this idea that, well, we need to stop making as much pollution, reduce, reuse, recycle. Those messages stuck with me much stronger than, I guess, like the DARE campaign or stuff that I was exposed to as a teenager, because that had, like, you know, as a child, those movies and those cartoons really had a lot of sway on us, on me in particular, I guess. Like the cartoons celebrating cleaning up the earth. But here we have this man, Ira Einhorn, and just like we would think, okay, we can say some good things about Kwanzaa as a message that celebrates black culture, and there's nothing wrong with that. Incidentally, I keep using that word, incidentally. I don't even know what it means. I use that word like I know what it means. Anyway, the 7 principles represented by Kwanzaa, celebrated by Kwanzaa, are the same that were later used by the Symbionese Liberation Front. And for those of us, including myself, who aren't old enough to remember that is an interesting story from around this time period. Anyway, Ira Einhorn murdered his girlfriend after breaking up with her, and stuffed her in his closet underneath styrofoam and stuff, and she mummified over the course of like 18 months, and in that time he escaped. He went to Europe, I believe, and was later extradited and sentenced. And that's the other hero. So think about that. Think about what's holidays really mean, where they come from, and if they will endure. If there is such a thing in this day and age to create a holiday, unless you have all of your bases covered. I think there is something to be said for religious holidays that we can't verify or incriminate as much, where the spirit of celebrating it is still pretty pure. As much as people like to complain about, oh, it's pagan Christmas or whatever. It's like, imagine a child with their parents, okay? Mommy, where does Christmas come from? Well, son, it comes from the birth of a man who would later be crucified, a man who resisted temptation and was good and was rewarded in the end, and who set an example for all of us. That's why we celebrate Christmas. We make each other happy, and we show our love, and we exchange gifts because we want to be good, just like Jesus. That's why we celebrate Christmas. Okay, well, Mommy, where does Kwanzaa come from? Where does Earth Day come from? These questions are a bit harder to answer. Moving on, according to the Jerusalem Post, the last train stop on the way to the Wailing Wall is going to be named after Trump. So congrats, Trump. Clearly this is meaningful for such a change to take place. It's very historic. And Trump expressed his gratitude for law enforcement by buying Christmas dinner for hundreds and hundreds of staff all afternoon from like 1 to 7 p.m. That's what it was. Full spread of Christmas food for all of the police and Secret Service and whatever that were working. So that was a nice thing for him to do. Finally, we're going to close out with one of my favorite Twitter handles, and that's Wisdom of Chopra. And it's computer-generated text, predictive text based on what he has said, and sort of to prove a point. Well, everything that Chopra says is just crap, and he's just making it all up, and he's just blending words together, which, to be fair, I don't believe. Even though I'm not a big fan of Chopra, every now and then, especially since I started following him because of this page, he will post some really insightful, good science and stuff like that. So I'm sure some of what he says is total crap, and I'm not here to defend him, but I'm just saying, like, having been exposed to the real person, I can still take the joke. And in fact, he has responded to the Wisdom of Chopra Twitter page by saying, you know, it's a great form of flattery for them to be doing this. But every now and then, usually the Wisdom of Chopra, it's hard to tell. You know, I have to check twice. I read it and then I'm like, is that really him? It's like, no, okay, it sounds like it could be him. Usually, most of the time. Every now and then, it just completely drops one that's completely wrong. And today it was, dogs are sterile. What does it mean? Dogs are sterile. Dogs aren't sterile. Where did dogs come from? Dogs are making more dogs. How can you say they're sterile? That's totally ridiculous. Wisdom of Chopra generator. But that's part of what makes it funny. And this reminded me of something that I read a while ago, which I was able to dig up. And I guess I was able to find this on Golf Digest, website I had never been to before, but a very nice website. And they had posted the Seinfeld computer-generated predictive text. Some computer geeks sat down and they made a script for a Seinfeld episode using predictive text. And it's hilarious, and if you find this stuff interesting, if you're kind of, I don't know, if you get some sick humor out of words, I wanted to start off, like, you know, every Seinfeld episode starts with Jerry Seinfeld standing in the nightclub talking into the microphone, right? Telling a little joke to set the mood, you know, before you hear that bass line. And this is the computer-generated one. Let's see if I can do this. What's the problem with the minimalism? You know, if you enjoy being around alcoholics, I'm gonna go ahead and never return that dog.